On the mainland, Manchu forces broke through Shanhai Pass in 1644 and rapidly overwhelmed the Ming dynasty in 1661. A naval fleet led by the Ming loyalist Qing arrived in Taiwan to oust the Dutch from Zealandia and establish a pro-Ming base in Taiwan. Qing was born to Zhang Zhilong, a Chinese merchant and pirate, and Tagawa Matsu, a Japanese woman, in 1624 in Hirado, Nagasaki Prefecture, Japan. He was raised there until 7 and moved to Quanzhou, in the Fujian province of China, in a family made wealthy from shipping and piracy. Qing inherited his father's trade networks, which stretched from Nagasaki to Macau. Following the Manchu advance on Fujian, Qing retreated from his stronghold in Amoy and besieged Taiwan in the hope of establishing a strategic base to marshal his troops to retake his base at Amoy in 1662. Following a 9-month siege, Qing captured the Dutch fortress Zealandia and Taiwan became his base. The Taiwanese aboriginal tribes who were previously allied with the Dutch against the Chinese during the Guo Huai Rebellion in 1652 turned against the Dutch during the siege of Fort Zealandia and defected to Qing's Chinese forces. The aboriginals of Sincan defected to Qing after he offered them amnesty. The Sincan aboriginals then proceeded to work for the Chinese and behead Dutch people in executions. The frontier aboriginals in the mountains and plains also surrendered and defected to the Chinese on the 17th of May 1661, celebrating their freedom from compulsory education under the Dutch rule by hunting down Dutch people and beheading them and trashing their Christian school textbooks. Qing died 4 months after the siege was over. There were speculations that he died in a sudden fit of madness when his officers refused to carry out his orders to execute his son Zhang Jing. Zhang Jing had an affair with his wet nurse and conceived a child with her. Other accounts are more straightforward, attributing Qing's death to a case of malaria. Following the death of Qing, his son Zhang Jing took over the Zhang regime, leading the remaining 7,000 Ming loyalist troops to Taiwan. In response to raids by Zhang Jing and in an effort to starve out the forces in Taiwan, the king decreed to relocate all of the southern coastal towns and ports that had been the targets of raids by the Zhang fleet and thus provided supplies for the resistance. This measure largely backfired, and between 1662 and 1664, 6 major waves of immigration occurred from these coastal towns to Taiwan, spurred by the severe hardships incurred from the Qing relocation policy. In a move to take advantage of this Qing misstep, Zhang Jing promoted immigration to Taiwan by promising free eastern land cultivation and ownership for peasants in exchange for compulsory military service by all males in case the island was in danger of a Qing invasion. In 1683, following a naval engagement with Admiral Shi Lang, one of Qing's father's trusted friends, Qing's grandson Zhang Keshuang surrendered to the Qing dynasty. There has been much confusion about Taiwan's association with the rumored Island of Dogs, Island of Women, etc., which were thought, by Han literati, to lie beyond the seas. Taiwan was officially regarded by the Kangxi Emperor as a ball of mud beyond the pale of civilization and did not appear on any map of the imperial domain until 1683. The act of presenting a map to the emperor was equal to presenting the lands of the empire. It took several more years before the Qing court would recognize Taiwan as part of the Qing realm. Prior to the Qing dynasty, China was conceived as a land bound by mountains, rivers, and seas. The idea of an island as a part of China was unfathomable to the Han prior to the Qing frontier expansion effort of the 17th century. Despite the expense of the military and diplomatic campaign that brought Taiwan into the imperial realm, the general sentiment in Beijing was ambivalent. The point of the campaign had been to destroy the Zheng family regime, not to conquer the island. The Kangxi Emperor expressed the sentiment that Taiwan was the size of a pellet. Taking it is no gain, not taking it is no loss. His ministers counseled that the island was a ball of mud beyond the sea, adding nothing to the breadth of China, and advocated removing all the Chinese to mainland China and abandoning the island. It was only the campaigning of Admiral Shi Lang and other supporters that convinced the emperor not to abandon Taiwan. Qing's followers were forced to depart from Taiwan to the more unpleasant parts of Qing-controlled land. By 1682, there were only 7,000 Chinese left on Taiwan as they had intermarried with Aboriginal women and had property in Taiwan. The Qing reign had continued the tax systems of the Dutch, established schools and religious temples. From 1683, the Qing dynasty ruled part of the island as Taiwan Prefecture and in 1875 divided the island into 2 prefectures, north and south. In 1887, The island was declared as a separate Fukien Taiwan province. The Qing authorities tried to limit immigration to Taiwan and barred families from traveling to Taiwan to ensure the immigrants would return to their families and ancestral graves. Illegal immigration continued, but many of the men had few prospects in war-weary Fujian and thus married locally, resulting in the idiom "has Tangshan father, no Tangshan mother." The king tried to protect Aboriginal land claims, but also sought to turn them into tax-paying subjects. Chinese and tax-paying Aborigines were barred from entering the wilderness, which covered most of the island, for the fear of raising the ire of the non-tax-paying Highland Aborigines and inciting rebellion. A border was constructed along the western plain, built using pits and mounds of earth, called earth cows, to discourage squatting. From 1683 to around 1760, the Qing government limited immigration to Taiwan. Such restriction was relaxed following the 1760s, and by 1811 there were more than 2 million Chinese immigrants on Taiwan. In 1875, Taipei Prefecture was established under the jurisdiction of Fujian Province. Also, there had been various conflicts between Chinese immigrants. Most conflicts were between Han from Fujian and Han from Guangdong, between people from different areas of Fujian, between Han and Hakka settlers, or simply between people of different surnames engaged in clan feuds. Because of the strong provincial loyalties held by these immigrants, the Qing government felt Taiwan was somewhat difficult to govern. Taiwan was also plagued by foreign invasions. In 1771, Morris Beniowski commanded the first European ship to visit the east coast of Taiwan and engaged in a series of violent conflicts with locals. Given the strategic and commercial value of Taiwan, there were British suggestions in 1840 and 1841 to seize the island. In September 1841, during the First Opium War, the British transport ship Nurbada became shipwrecked near Keeling Harbor due to a typhoon. The Brigand also became shipwrecked in March 1842. Most of the crew were Indian Lascars. Survivors from both ships were transferred by authorities to the capital Tainan. The Taiwan Qing commanders, Ta Hung Ah and Yao Ying, filed a disingenuous report to the emperor, claiming to have defended against an attack from the Keeling fort. In October 1841, HMS Nimrod sailed to Keeling to search for the Nurbada survivors. But after Captain Joseph Pierce found out that they were sent south for imprisonment, he ordered the bombardment of the harbor and destroyed 27 sets of cannon before returning to Hong Kong. Most of the survivors, over 130 from the Nurbada and 54 from the An, were executed in Tainan in August 1842. The Aboriginals often slaughtered the shipwrecked crews of Western ships. In 1867, the entire American crew of the Rover were massacred by Aboriginals in the Rover incident, when the Americans launched the punitive Formosa expedition in retaliation. The Aboriginals defeated the Americans and forced them to retreat, killing an American Marine while suffering no casualties themselves. During the Sino-French War, the French attempted an invasion of Taiwan during the Keeling Campaign in 1884. Liu Mingchuan, who was leading the defense of Taiwan, recruited Aboriginals to serve alongside the Chinese soldiers in fighting against the French. The French were defeated at the Battle of Tamsui, and the Qing forces pinned the French down at Keeling in an 8-month-long campaign before the French withdrew. Because of these incursions, the Qing government began constructing a series of coastal defenses, and in 1885, work commenced to make Taiwan a province, with Liu Mingchuan serving as the first governor. He divided Taiwan into 11 counties and tried to improve relations with the Aborigines. He also developed a railway from Taipei to Hsinchu, established a mine in Keeling, and built an arsenal to improve Taiwan's defensive capability against foreigners. Following a shipwreck of a Ryukyuan vessel on the southeastern tip of Taiwan in winter of 1871, in which the heads of 54 crew members were taken by the Aboriginal Taiwanese Paiwan people in the Mutin incident, the Japanese sought to use this incident as a pretext to have the Qing formally acknowledge Japanese sovereignty over the Ryukyu Islands as Japanese territory and to test reactions to potential expansion into Taiwan. According to records from Japanese documents, Mao Changxi and Dong Zun, the Qing ministers at Zhongli Yamen who handled the complaints from Japanese envoy Yanagihara Sakamitsu, replied first that they had heard only of a massacre of Ryukyuans, not of Japanese, and quickly noted that Ryukyu was under Chinese suzerainty, and therefore this issue was not Japan's business. In addition, the Governor-General of the Qing province Fujian had rescued the survivors of the massacre and returned them safely to Ryukyu. The Qing authorities explained that there were two kinds of Aborigines on Taiwan: those governed by the king, and those unnaturalized raw barbarians, beyond the reach of Qing government and customs. They indirectly hinted that foreigners traveling in those areas settled by indigenous people must exercise caution. After the Yanagihara Yamen interview, the Japanese took their explanation to mean that the Qing government had not opposed Japan's claims to sovereignty over the Ryukyu Islands, disclaimed any jurisdiction over Aboriginal Taiwanese, and had indeed consented to Japan's expedition to Taiwan. The Qing dynasty made it clear to the Japanese that Taiwan was definitely within Qing jurisdiction, even though part of that island's Aboriginal population was not yet under the influence of Chinese culture. The Qing also pointed to similar cases all over the world where an Aboriginal population within a national boundary was not completely subjugated by the dominant culture of that country. The Japanese nevertheless launched an expedition to Mutin village with a force of 36 soldiers in 1874. The number of killed Peiwen was about 30, and that for the Japanese was 6, eventually. The Japanese withdrew after being paid a massive indemnity by the king. This incident caused the king to rethink the importance of Taiwan in their maritime defense strategy, and greater importance was placed on gaining control over the wilderness regions. On the eve of the First Sino-Japanese War, about 45% of the island was administered under direct Qing administration, while the remaining was lightly populated by Aborigines, and a population of around 2.5 million. About 2.3 million were Han Chinese, and the remaining 200,000 were classified as members of various indigenous tribes.